Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Scouting for Growth podcast. Today, we have a guest who is not just breaking the mold, but redefining what it means to be a venture capitalist in today's world. Please join me in welcoming Adrian Mendoza, the founder and general partner of Mendoza Ventures, the first Latinx founded VC fund on the East Coast that is both Latinx and woman owned. Adrian's journey is nothing short of inspiring as the first generation Mexican American who turned a successful tech exit into a platform for empowering others. He is a living testament to the power of perseverance and vision. With 20 years of experience building technology products and leading teams, Adrian knows the startup world inside and out. At Mendoza Ventures, he's not just investing in fintech, AI, and cybersecurity. He is investing in diversity and inclusion too. About 90% of his portfolio companies are led by people of color and women, proving that diversity isn't just a buzzword. It is a blueprint for success. Under his leadership, the firm has raised two funds, celebrating four successful exits, and is now raising a $100 million fintech fund anchored by none other than Bank of America. But wait, there is more. Adrian has been recognized as one of the first most influential people in Boston by Axios magazine and honored as a DEI visionary by the LA Times. He is a regular contributor on CNBC and has been featured in Forbes, Bloomberg, and the Boston Globe. And if that is not enough, right? If that was not enough, actually, he recently launched Mendoza Impact, a philanthropic initiative dedicated to supporting diverse female founders and fund managers. Adrian isn't just about business. It's about change. And he's here to share his insight on everything from pitfalls to how do we deal with corporate life and building corporate innovation lab to the art of securing strategic investments. And trust me, he has some stories to tell us. Don't miss them. So grab your coffee, settle in, and get ready for a fun, insightful, and downright inspiring conversation. Let's give a warm welcome to Adrian Mendoza. Hi, Adrian. Thank you so much for joining me on the Scouting for Growth podcast.
Happy to be on. Excited to be on it with you.
So, well, Adrian, let's get started with a bit of background question to you. I mean, today you have Mendoza Venture, your main area of practice. But tell us, what did you do before then, and what got you to go into the VC space?
Yeah, I think this was about over 10 years in the making. So prior to running Mendoza Ventures, we had two venture-backed startups. But before that, so I'm originally from Southern California, came out to the East Coast in 98 for grad school at Harvard, and I came right at the middle of the dot-com boom. But during the mid-90s, I was doing things like building distance education courses online for some of the university groups. And so I had this incredible online skill set. By the time I showed up to the East Coast in 99, I was surrounded by, doing work for the Razorfishes of the world, the Sapiens of the world, right at the beginning, and then got recruited to IBM's Innovation Lab. And so I spent my first part of my career at places like Walt Disney Imagineering, the e-commerce innovation lab for IBM, really focused on sort of online, the building of innovation and sort of intersection of technology. Went out to build a consultancy where I was working with brands, everything from mobility brands to then going to build the venture-backed startups. And so it was all of these experiences that laid the groundwork of me being an operator, but also having domain expertise in e-commerce and working with brands and working with creative teams. Some of my focus at Harvard Business School was taking courses on managing creative teams and how do you get the best outcome out of a difference between business teams and intrinsic, extrinsic motivation. And so that was really like there were several things that led up to it, but it was the experience of having operated and started two venture-backed startups that put us into that right into the innovation economy and sort of building of companies. And from there, we went on to sort of become the investor, which is the next step for most founders.
So we hear a little bit about what inspired you to launch Mendoza Ventures as the first Latinx, right, founded VC fund on the East Coast, I gathered. So how do you think your background has influenced your approach to venture capital?
Well, one of the things is as founders, we had raised VC capital in 2010. We had, a board that said, hey, we want to, sell your position, look, it's time for, we're going to sell the company, go find something to do, like all the story of all early stage founders. But during my journey, part of it is we saw a couple of things that we never saw. It was very rare to find someone who was an operator, founder that was investor. And this is circa 2015. This is really unheard of to find a founder that had now started becoming investor. But at the same time, we had a lot of experiences where we would meet people, incredible people with domain expertise. And they would come to us and say, hey, I know you, I invested in you. And I was like, who are you? And they said, well, I invested through this fund and that fund, and those funds invested in you. And I saw that, especially in very technical spaces, venture capital was a black box. You would have these incredible limited partners, the LPs of funds, but they would never connect with the founders. And we theorized that there was an ability and potentially success in breaking that black box open and connecting incredible investors that had operational and domain expertise with the founders that were building these types of companies. And that's really what was the genesis of Mendoza Ventures. It's let's get some incredible talent together with the talent that's building companies. But also at the same time, we saw no one that looked like us. There was no women writing venture checks. There was no Latinos writing venture checks. And we didn't really know that we were one of the first Latinx venture funds on the East Coast until those individuals in private equity came out to us and said, hey guys, you know that you are the first. And I said, no, we can't be. We're probably the first in Boston. And they said, keep on going up. And these were groups in Washington, D.C. and New York. And they were like, what about New York? And they're like, keep on going. What about the East Coast? And so it was really never by design, but it had just happened to be from happenstance because we built what we knew how to build. We knew how to build technology companies. But it was pretty incredible to see those, not in venture, but those in private equity that said, look, you're fairly unique because you're an operator, but also you're very unique because you're a Latino and your partner is female. That was really uncommon in 2016.
Yeah, I gather. I mean, because what you're saying is diversity plays a significant role in your investment decisions, right? And so with, I gather, 90% of your portfolio led by immigrants, people of colors, and women. What for you are some of the challenges you have had to face in championing diversity within your venture portfolio? And the world we're in today, which hopefully is changing a little bit, partly when we think about, sustainability and social innovation.
Really good question because I think for the longest time in venture, one of the things is that venture is very localized. The Boston funds invest in Boston, the London funds invest in London, New York invest in New York, and the Valley funds invest in Valley. And one of the things that when we first looked at the landscape, we realized that there was an opportunity to find incredible talent that was not the kids that went to Oxford or the kids that went to Stanford. And within that, if you are only looking at these pockets of individuals and students, you're missing out on everything in between. And that's where we theorized was that there was incredible talent that sounded and looked differently. One of the first investments we ever made were two Latinos that were, working at RSA, a security company, and left because they had an idea. They didn't have Ivy League educations. They were domain experts, and that company returned a 10x in 5 months back to us. And that was quickly showing that there is this incredible talent that's at corporates, that's in rural areas, in middle America, in areas that no one's touching, that is out there, that has ideas, that is building companies that aren't at a Stanford or a Harvard Business School or an Oxford or an IIT. You're really looking for talent that could be anywhere. And so for us as a firm, you know, it's we invest in this talent because we look like that talent. We are 50% owned by a person of color, 50% owned by women. It's natural that that talent finds us because they see that we're investing in talent like that. And that's really for us has been the mainstay of what we're doing. And we get companies that are coming from everywhere. We're getting decks through Facebook, through LinkedIn, where a lot of VC and private equity struggles to find pipeline. We're the opposite. I could quickly deploy 500 million in a year because we have this much incredible talent and pipeline that's coming to meet us.
I often hear, and I think things probably have not changed yet, that probably 4% of VCs are there, maybe female women investors. And so it's interesting to see how you've been able to be recognized as the most influential, I guess, team in Boston and across the East Coast on a diversity, equity, and inclusion viewpoint by the LA Times as well, I gathered. How do you leverage that influence, actually, Adrian, to drive change and challenge the way things are being seen today in the venture capital ecosystem when things hopefully are changing little by little?
Well, I think it's part of it is a couple of months ago, the Boston Globe wrote an article about us of how we're redefining DE&I. And for us, DE&I is not just black and brown and female, but also age diversity, veterans, those coming from rural areas. Because I think it's like if you're going to look at, equity and inclusion, it just can't be within a subsegment because then that's incredibly hard to find talent. We've got one portco that's doing incredibly well, and it's a woman in her 70s and 80s who is a CEO of a company. Not a typical view of what a traditional VC might be hiring the 25 or 30-year-old out of Stanford. This is someone with life experience. Another of our company is a Latino gentleman who is working on a security company, and he is ex-naval intelligence, ex-Navy, understands that portion of working with government tech. And that's really when you look at that, it goes back to that point of we've got to find talent regardless of where it is and what it looks like. And that talent by design is going to be very different looking. And so for us, how we leverage it is that yes, we're moving millions of dollars, but also how do we leverage policy and how that dollars are being deployed at the state and the government level. My partner Jennifer sits on the national, and the national, it's called NACI. It's the National Administrative Council for Entrepreneurialism. She helped write a portion of the tech hubs, a part of the CHIPS Act for here in the US, and included in things like that, that there be childcare in chips factories. Because if you're going to put manufacturing in a rural area, you have to make sure that someone in a rural area can have childcare to do these high-end upskilling tech jobs. At the same time, last week we were at the White House talking to the SBA, to Treasury, to Commerce about how they're actively deploying their dollars at a state by state level. And we started asking the questions, like I said, look, we know your programs, we know what you're trying to do. How are they actually getting across to those funds and those founders who are representative of the area? California is 60% Latino. If we're looking at being representative of that area, then 60% of the capital should be going to Latinos. Most states are 50% women. It should 50% of capital should be going to women. And that's where us of, yes, we're doing the work we do, but how do we influence policy, the current administration? How do we also influence the ecosystem as well?
So, great initiatives, but can you share an example of time when you face maybe resistance or skepticisms in your ability to deliver your mission and, achieve diversity and inclusion in your work, and how you turn that challenge into, I guess, an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use that good example of the two founders that we sold for 10x. These were two founders from South Texas, didn't have your typical degrees. They did not have the tip. We were the first investor in. We were actually the only investor because they didn't look like the mold. They didn't look like the kid that went to Stanford or the kid that went to Harvard and was looking to start a company. These were clearly not the obvious candidates to receive venture capital money. Yet they were able to turn such a fast return because we had to put our hands into the business. We had to help. We have a good example. We have a company that was Boston based, that was an AI company. And we invested like early on, like 2016, 2017, same thing. Founder with a diverse team, without an Ivy League education, but we were hands in order to be able to provide those outcomes. You as investor cannot be a passive investor. You have to help find customers, help find investors, help mentor these individuals because they've never run a company with 80 to 100 people before. You're going to have to find the talent that goes with them. They're not going to be able to find, how to get into a mainstream financial institution or a corporate. And that's part of it that when I look back, I saw that there was a lot of this work being done in sort of middle market, lower middle market private equity, where you had private equity companies very involved in not really the operating, but sort of the mentorship of that talent. And we took these pieces and we brought it into venture capital. And in the beginning, there was resistance of, I don't know if this model would work. After a while, people realized that our model works. And so by the time we got to Fund 3, it was actually the largest bank in the US, Bank of America, reached out to us and said, "We've heard about you guys. We've heard about your model. We'd like to anchor your next fund because not only do we want to invest in diverse emerging managers, but we're also making a strategic investment in finding a fund like yours that can bring these incredible talented companies into a Bank of America, ecoverse." And soon to follow, 6 months later, the sixth largest bank in the US, Truist, came in as an investor for that same reason. And so for us, it's taken, this is 8 years and 8 minutes, but this is part of what we're doing is as an investor, building a track record. And that comes from, our references aren't just the investors, our references are the founders that we back, but also those that we've had exits with.
That's wonderful because we need more of those. So now I'd like to go into rethinking corporate innovation and a term which is coming to market called venture clienting. So, Adrian, based on your example and your experience working for IBM Innovation Labs, and I think John Hancock's as well, you have spoken about failure of the corporate model, right? The traditional approach to having corporate working with startups or growth ventures. What are the key shortcomings in your views, based on your observation of why is the model not that successful?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the genesis of this came from very early on in 2015. It was about 2015, 2016. I wrote a three-part series on the failure of the innovation lab. And this is really interesting because it wasn't just observations of what I saw having been at two innovation labs about 10 to 15 years apart, but also as I started writing, I was being approached by others that ran innovation labs and being told anecdotes of what was happening and what were the challenges that they discovered. But even in my own experience, one of the issues that we'd see, I mean, I would say there's three main issues, is by building this innovation lab to the corporate, you send this message that innovation only happens at this lab with these individuals. And really, the model that it sends is to other individuals in the corporate to say, well, you can't innovate only this group. And that makes it really difficult for, your sort of experience or your new employee to say, I want to start something, I want to do something. I think the second one is also another failure, is that you then get this talent, but then that talent makes it really difficult to interface with the business units. Because, for example, at John Hancock, I was able to find a database company that was using graph databases to be able to generate insights from data at Hancock. And they came back to me and said this was going to be a free proof of concept for them. They said, no, no, we still have to get it through risk and compliance and vendor approval. Oh, and by the way, we have to do an RFP. I'm like, no, we just want to do a free POC where they just show us what we can do. And trying to go through 2 to 3 months, they just gave up because there was no way involved. And the business units were being surprised. Like, whoa, what are we looking at? And I think that makes it really hard because you have to sort of find that entryway where you can be a little bit more flexible. And then the third issue is that when you have this talent, and it's not being fully utilized. What ended up being happening in several innovation labs is they began outsourcing the talent to do things. They became outsourced development shops. They became out like they were off doing on everything except for innovation. And I think that really kind of killed it for that. And you're sort of your entrepreneur that's trying to build things, but doesn't have the pipeline to get into the business unit, doesn't have the dollars to innovate. And one of the interesting things that we would do at Hancock that was very prevalent, and this is like 2016, is that you would take the design school model from Stanford. And I remember having these arguments with the guy who ran the D School program here in Boston. And I said, well, the problem with using design thinking is that you're looking for an issue, but for a business unit, they may not actually know they have an issue or not, or be completely happy. And so they would run these programs, and then the outcomes would be like, no, everything's good here. We have no problems. And they're like, no, you clearly have problems. They're like, no, our business unit is fine. And so it never accounts for that zero sum game where someone says, look, there's just no solution here. Or you're trying to spur these ideas. And one of the things that the purist of the design thinking would do is they would say, well, we're not going to take objects out. So we're going to do random objects. Well, in some cases, we saw people like taking the random objects, building phones out of them, and then building buttons and being like, no, I actually want to focus on an interface. That's what we have our issue. Like, we're not going to come up with a funny duck and like, or a banana, and that is representative of the issues. We actually want to talk about the issues. Um, I think it's funny because right now, I think the innovation lab has become the corporate VC. But I think the next generation is that client venturing that requires the corporate to not just, I mean, yes, they're sort of outsourcing it, but there has to be a handshake on both sides.
So when I decided to move from building acceleration program, my big concern and observation, and you have to go through that learning, right? You have to work with the corporation and the startup to internalize what you feel may need to improve. Is for me, it was the lack of commercialization. A lot of corporates at the time, and I work with insurance companies, were observing. And my motto is, at the end of the day, collaboration needs to turn into a commercial relationship where one and the other are able to actually grow together through that exchange of value, which is paid for. So for me, when the concept of venture clienting came out, which for me it's all about corporate startup commercialization, and I realized it was then gaining traction, I realized potentially we have an exit route to make sure that corporation can collaborate with startups. But to do that effectively, for me, is you need to have a corporate with strategy with clear problem they want to solve. I think corporate venturing in the sense of venture clienting succeed because often it's about solving for horizon one, efficiency serving, improving processes, rather than going into, business model innovation. And also sometimes having product and service innovation, so launching and putting new product to market, leveraging this talent, those young ventures. So, Adrian, how do you see this model disrupting traditional corporate startup relationship when we actually want, as you said, better proof of concept or commercial pilot where there is a financial exchange, where we actually want to make sure that the talent is not used as development shop, but really truly doing innovation. How do you see this new model probably be successful, and where should it evolve for it to succeed as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we're in the CVC model right now, where it's currently, I think, netted out is one, the innovation labs are predominantly gone. They've been replaced by corporate CVCs that are being maybe given a list of here is problems, and then they run out to find not early stage companies, but very mature companies. And so because of that, and then now there's sort of, it's also within there is corp dev and iBanking, and now they're looking at a traditional, build versus buy, but they're missing out on what the business unit needs, which is you've got to solve my problem. And I have a very detailed problem to solve. So pulling a company that we think is good or may has 20, 30 million in revenue is not going, you're going to have to tell them to put the brakes on and say, well, and most of it, there is a disconnect. The model that we started looking at, which is very close to being to your model, is we realized that in order to, we as a fund, we run a venture fund, we have management fees, we have limited partners and investors. It's very hard, to work with outside corporates. We do a lot of work with our LPs, those banks, the B of A's, the Truist. And what we do is we meet every quarter and we talk about the companies we have and we talk about the pain points that we have and we try to put them together. And so we have someone on my team who is our head of partnerships, and every quarter he's trying to put them together or he's reaching out to within our LP base to find people that can make introductions. And it's worked really very well. We've built partnerships with MasterCard, we've built partnerships with Visa, Equifax. But what if you're trying to work with someone that's outside of this universe? So about last year, we started a nonprofit called Mendoza Impact, and really it focuses on investor education that we do ourselves. We have a fellowship program for MBA students, and then we have a founders program. And one of the things that we did with the founders program is that we don't start with a traditional cohort like a YC where they find a cohort and then they say, oh, you're out in the world, is we actually start with a corporate first. We go to the corporate and we say, hey, what's your pain point? And a lot of the times they'll open up and say, well, this is our pain point. We have issues with payments. We have issues with this customer segment. And what we'll do is we use philanthropy dollars. So unlike commercial dollars, sometimes it's easier for them to go to the foundation side and say, hey, we're going to take, some dollars and we're going to sponsor a program with philanthropy dollars. They get a tax write-off. And what we do is say, great, what we're going to do is we know you have a statement. We're actually working right now with a financial, where, we've just started the process of working with a large financial institution. Their pain point is how do we find products and services for the Latino customer? So we say, great, you have what I ask for you is philanthropy dollars, but I also want you be involved with the business units. I want you to bring people with me. And I want you to bring, the sponsor, the end user, who's the person that's actually going to be writing the bill. And what we'll do, and you can help us, is we're going to find a group of startups and assign them this problem to work on. Again, these are early stage concepts, startups, where they can just ideate and work, because you can't bring a company that has 5-10 million of revenue and say, oh, by the way, you're going to go off on this challenge. You've got to bring an early stage company who what they get is that we do a small seeding, investment, but they also get to work with a corporate and get that experience. And for us, it was incredible because one of the things we were hearing was we want from corporates, we want to work with early stage startups, but we can't bring them in-house because then we have to go through my Hancock, an RFP process, risk, compliance, vendor selection, vendor approval. But if they can do it in a sandbox, just how they do it with yourself, Sabine, but with us in our nonprofit, in our case, they use philanthropy dollars. And if nothing happens, then it was a donation. But if something happens and there's magic of at least one or two companies, they've now spent 3-4 months working with them, ideating with them, introducing them to people. Now that they have a use case and a solution for that use case, then they could move them straight into, all right, now we're going to move you into the corporate universe because you have a solution, we've done a discovery, we've done a product, or not even a product, but a POC, then we can move you directly and fast track you because they don't want to ideate while they're sitting there and working. They want to do it outside so that when they're ready, they can go to the CBC and say, oh, we found a company. This is filling what we wanted to do, and it's a solution to a problem that we know that we have.
Interesting. And so for you, Adrian, how do you see the role of corporations now play? Because you mentioned that from Innovation Lab, we moved to CVCs, and I've seen it as well. And CVCs, put money in the venture, and their goal is to see whether it fits within the corporate HQ. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I also have seen some CVCs, disappearing because, they were not able to actually deliver the value that the business was looking for. So what do you see that rules to be, how it can evolve? Because what you are doing with the foundation is actually working with early stage startups as well to give them an opportunity to know how to work with a corporation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because one of the things that, we've seen the same thing happen. We've seen corporates invest into funds through their CVC, but the fund managers don't get the fact that, no, you have to deliver something. For us, our investment with Truist was strategic. And during their process, they did about 20 interviews with our founders. And they did it by design. They had a list of the companies and the founders, and they had a list of business units, and they were personally matching them together. They were saying, well, this could fill this could potentially be this. And out of that, they started talking to the founders and saying, hey, well, do you work with this? Do you work with that? That's very unlike a traditional CVC. Most of them are, when they invest in funds, they're not clear that, hey, we expect a return. With Truist, they're very clear. We expect during our relationship, 1 to 3 commercial relationships. And we've said, great, we will focus on that. And we're going to be very aggressive to make sure that when we meet on a quarterly basis, we are putting companies that are fit. We've also just had a meeting with them last week, and they said, hey, we're starting to define our 2025 goals, and here are the things that we're looking for. And that's, I think, where CVCs need to take that model, is being able to actively engaging with the business unit. Because one of the things where funds and startups fall down on working with CVCs is they try to put companies to be a potential investment, funds to be a potential investment, but they realize that the dollars may not be theirs. They belong to the cost center, the business unit that's going to be owning them. And what we've seen it be successful in the past is where the company finds that business champion, goes to the business unit, builds a POC, starts working on a commercial relationship, and then you double back to the CVC to say, oh, this company has already selected this startup as a vendor. That's a completely different conversation because they realize there's already a match.
So let's actually spend some time guiding startups in securing strategic investment, because what I've seen over the past year, looking at FinTech, just FinTech, the investment in FinTech is half what it was last year, which is half what it was the year before. So because of high interest rates, high cost of capital, high inflations, I guess the investment market has been really careful and very picky on the choices they make. And I think that is around the world in the US as much as in Europe. So as many startups are struggling in navigating relationship with strategic investment right now, especially within the corporate environment, as you just highlighted, what advice do you have for founders who are seeking to find funding and strategic partners in particular?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money with sort of the drop in sort of US and international fintech funding. A lot of that had to do with funding 3 to 5 years ago was very focused on B2C, neobanks, challenger banks. And a lot of that downfall was in the fact that there was not enough revenue on interchange. A 1/4%. You would have to be bringing in order to get 1 million in revenue, close to, 100, 100 to 200 million in actually transactions going through your platform. And so one of the things that we saw was this disconnect between, oh, we think this is helpful for a Visa or a MasterCard or insert traditional financial institution, but where the really strategic investments come from are for more of a B2B approach. Because these financial institutions, like insurance companies, have a front office, a mid office, a back office. And most of the B2C things fall in the front office. Um, they may not be ready to buy brands that could focus on consumers. They already have their brands focused on consumers. But where you're able to still view a lot of money being moved, we still see this massive opportunity in modernization, in insurance companies, in financial institution, especially as they're sitting on warehouses and warehouses of data, of customer data, transaction data, of credit data, of investment data. And right now there's a lot of excitement around generative AI, but also there's also a lot of excitement of, oh, we're not ready to do this. We actually have to integrate and pull our data sets together and clean the data. And this is something that I saw at Hancock. At Hancock, we were looking at trying to predict data, and the business units were just happy to get it on an iPad. Because right now, like this is 2016, the world's financial data was coming to them on printouts on only a day basis. And if they wanted to look backwards in the next day in the past, they'd have to run to get like the paper reports of all those days, put them together. And I remember we did something where we put a POC together where we took analytics data and reporting data, put them together on an iPad, and they were like, we're just happy enough. This is perfect. And we're like, no, but we can do predictions. And they're like, no, because we have no insight to the past. And it's very different when you go to a SaaS company at that time that is doing all sorts of high-end graph databases and SQL databases. And they don't even need that. They just want access to the data itself. And so it's really important. And this is, I think, for me, for that kind of the advice of the founder that I give a lot is if you want to disrupt and innovate and modernize these spaces, you have to come from spending some time in these spaces themselves as a domain expert. It's why some of the best founders and exits we've had are those have worked within cybersecurity or financial services that have actually seen it from the inside, have seen what the problems, have lived through the problems, and then go out to spin out and start a company. Because I think it's very easy as, someone in the innovation economy to say, oh, this will fix it, and going to the CBCs and say, oh, I have something that's amazing without understanding risk, compliance, legal, without understanding data ownership, without understanding PII, without understanding restrictions. And that's why it's been super hard for even sticking in generative AI because you can't, there's with generative, there is a hallucination, this 10-20% of data that gets hallucinated. You can't hallucinate in an insurance company with claim records. You can't make up results. And that makes it very hard for early stage startup to come in there and say, look, I'm going to show you this great thing. We're like, no, this, John Hancock alone managed, and State Street managed the world's financial data, millions of customers. We can't go in there and be flippant with how we view customer safety and security.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting how also this world we're talking about is changing with myself working in B2B now, probably all my life. And, when I started working with startups, I preferred to work with B2B, business to business ventures, because I knew that I could help them learn how to get into insurance companies, which was where all my 25 years of expertise or 20 years of expertise before that was. And I do believe that we have so much opportunity to modernize what I call the house, the operational house of the corporations, helping them being more digitalized, to actually interact with their end customers in better ways. So there is so much to be done, but also to innovate around product innovation. As you were mentioning, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need more niche products to target very specific segments. So there is a great opportunity, at least in insurance, to address what we call the protection gap, where we are able to produce and deliver products and services which are much more affordable for the target market by enabling younger organizations to understand the problem and therefore work with corporates or work with actually platform where they can fit in, which are the platform which are already within the corporates to enable them to be more digitized. But so from your experience, Adrian, what are the key factors that make a great corporate startup ready engagement?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think the first one is knowing the domain, because it's especially when you look at, let's say, like cybersecurity and identity. A lot of these identity companies come in and they talk to the corporates and they're like, haha, you should use our platform. And you don't realize that the corporate's already spent a $2 million license with $3 million professional services. They're not going to rip it out just because you have the most newest up-to-date thing. They just bought this. I see this with financial services where a lot of startups are saying, hey, you should kick out your Jack Henry or your Fiserv or your FIS Bancorp and use our new modern Bancorp. And I'm like, this is a $2 to $5 million deal with a 10-year contract. They're not going to rip it out. And I see that a lot when people are like, yes. And then they come into it and realize that there's some hard truths about, trying to bring in, take out an existing incumbent. But at the same time, when you look at even smaller financial institutions, smaller insurance companies, they're bombarded by startups. Oh, I can help you with this. I can help you with this. And they realize that for a lot of them, how do I just make it better? A lot of them are just looking for what can I bring in to just better use what I've already spent the dollars on. So I think that understanding of the space, understanding what things cost, understanding the audience, because I remember, I would say about 15 years ago, I got quoted in the Credit Union Times at saying that the innovation is going to come from credit unions because they were smaller and nimble. And in the US, it was probably a bit longer than that. They actually had started doing like remote check capture was done in credit unions here in the US before it went to the JP Morgans and the Bank of Americas, because you could start, you could fail at a smaller scale, was a smaller amount of customers, see adoption, and then the larger, banks followed in tow. That's another piece where the startup founder has to realize that you've got to see smaller adoption. And I think even for the CVCs, a lot of them that I see is that they're so caught up on the large companies, the $5 to $10 million in revenues, but they need to look earlier. What is the thing that in 5 to 10 years is coming up? What are the things that small banks are adopting now? And it's really difficult when you talk to some of the large financial institutions. I remember with that company, Good Dog, post acquisition, I interviewed a lot of the corporate customers. And a lot of them were like, yes, I love this. This is amazing. Their platform is incredible. But I have 215 engineers. that I need to give them something to do. And we may just build it ourselves because we have to give them something to do. And so that understanding of who the customer is and qualifying them is important. But also from the CVC side, keeping an eye on one, being realistic on what you can offer the business, what you need to be looking at what's coming. And a lot of startups think, oh, I've met with them. Oh, they're keeping track of you. No, they're just doing a lot of education. And there's still so much education that has to happen for both the startup and the CVC and the business units, because a lot of them, they're still 5, 10 years behind. I think, Sabine, you're completely correct that there's still massive opportunities for modernization, especially, even though it looks like from the front of the house, from the B2C side, that there's so much happening with the neobanks and with the Betterments of the world and with these large innovative startups, the mid and back office is still not innovative. Like I remember uh, when I had my startup early mid, I would say 2014 or earlier than that. I did a consulting project to bootstrap our company at State Street, and the world's financial data was being run on a USB key and moved from one floor to the other floor, where then it was hand validated and and if it wasn't, they would run it back up to correct the error and then run it down. And it would happen on a daily basis, 5 days a week, starting at 9 to noon. And then they would prep to reset for the next, the next day. And I think people realize that that is just prevalent. And so that there is so many pieces, but it also needs the CVC to be proactive to the business unit, to be like, no, what are issues that are hurting you right now? What are issues that, you wish that if you waved your magic wand? Because for a lot of the business units, going back to that design school thinking, a lot of them say, well, this is great. It works, but they don't understand what's available to them, what else they can do. And this is where we're starting to see interesting pieces of AI that may optimize them to get them more efficient. But it's also, I think the more education that you as founder and VC do to the space, the easier it will be for them to say, oh, I want to use this so that they know what to ask for. Because a lot of them will not know when the CVC asks, what's your problem? They won't know how to ask for what type of technology.
Yeah. And particularly when artificial intelligence is moving so fast, everybody now has to play catch up, right? When we look at that modernization, I think large corporation, mature businesses now realize they don't have a choice if they want to actually acquire and attract the customer of tomorrow. So because you're actually building strong relationship with, early stage, ventures and building strong syndicated funding with them and also helping them identify partnership opportunities, can you share some strategies as you're looking at those organizations scaling up? Do you have strategies to help them effectively scale and secure growth funding in the future?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do as an investor, I think, are twofold. One is when we build a syndication, we work constantly with a lot of these CVCs and the sort of the corp dev groups. So we've pulled in individuals like Cisco Ventures, Barclays Bank into deals with us. With the goal of it is not for them to be a customer, but for them to do a small investment into an early stage company just to keep track of it. So that when they're ready to scale, one, you've got a CVC. I mean, you don't want to have a cap table full of CVCs early on because it's very hard for them to make a decision and move fast. So you want, I would say like the optimal is 25 to 30% because you're trying to, as you know, the startup founder needs to understand you're planting the seeds for tomorrow. This is not, yes, there's so much worry about, oh, I need the funding round for the seed or for the Series A. You have to, as founder, and having been that founder, being thinking about what are the investors that I put on my cap table, corporates included, strategic investors that at the B or the Series C can come in and write a much larger check. But for me, it's how do we bring them in to also build customer relationships early on? Because for us, like we have a company in the fraud space, Fiverity. um, their bank, Grasshopper Bank, which is also an LP in us, is also a customer of them and is also an investor in them. They invested early to be able to have build more of a partnership where they're building a discovery and a product for them. And they became a customer and an investor. That for me is the perfect world because the company now receives funding, but it gets what it really needs is a corporate early customer. So that's one strategy that we use. The second strategy, and this is more for our limited partners, is we do our annual meetings in person, and we do about I would say 5, 6 hours of content. We start at 9, we end at 3 in the afternoon, and every year we go and do talks about the state of cybersecurity and fintech and AI to start doing that education piece. Because we can go out and it's hard to like educate to everyone, but if I can get them all in a room, and then we invite guests as well, and we go and we pull not only from our founders, but we pull it into our network of limited partners who are industry experts to bring them into the room to find that mix together of founders and funders working together. And so this year we did a panel on like the state of cybersecurity, on fintech, what were the challenges post neobank world? What were the challenges with selling identity in cybersecurity? And then we did one on AI, like how are we seeing AI integrated into modernization, into spaces like fraud? And then we do usually a keynote, a large speaker that can talk either about their investment, it's traditionally a corporate, but it was really great because then we saw, by the end of it, everybody was taking notes. Everybody was like, oh my God, now I have a reference point of someone to talk to. And they're pulling in other LPs, they're pulling in other founders to be potentially sit on their advisory boards. Because we as a fund, we also build advisory boards as we come in because we need to have that, and then we even in some companies go deeper is we'll help them find either an LP or someone in our network to be a practice leader. So an insurance practice leader, a financial services practice leader. So when they're selling, they have an industry expert or an advisory board that can point them in the right direction.
Yeah, superb. So you already mentioned some key themes. So, but my last question to you, Adrian. So when we look at corporation and ventures, what are the key emerging trends they should actually pay attention to right now? Where is the opportunity?
Yeah, I think the first one is everyone's going to talk about AI because that was the education piece of it. It's like, how am I going to do it? When am I going to do it? They know they can't use traditional ChatGPT and LLM in an enterprise. So there's a lot of education there that's happening. We do it through our LPs, we do it through our portcos. The other piece is, you know, customer segments. They're looking at, what's happening on the underbank side, what's happening on the overbank side, because, you have underbanked customers that we refer to as on-ramps and off-ramps. How do we get that customer to be a customer for any of these banks, any of these insurance companies that might not be credit invisible, that might need to be, help them build credit, but then bringing in a stream of customers that most traditional brands aren't going after. But at the same time, on the other side, there's a lot of on the overbanked. We're the overbanked on this call. You have banks and insurance companies reaching out to us to say, please move over here. So it's what, we in the ad tech world used to be called direct conquesting. Different brands are chasing after you because you're a good customer. So I'm going to specifically advertise you to take you out of Chase and move you to B of A, take you out of B of A and move you to Wells Fargo. And that's something where on the high-end customer, those that, potential for wealth management or home loans, the banks are coming to us and saying, well, how do we respond to these sort of higher tier customers? How do we make it more attractive? So that's one of the interesting things. And is it like, a payment solution? Is it a reward solution? Is it a credit card solution? So that's been interesting to see kind of one side of the spectrum and the other. And there's still a lot in the middle, but they're right now just trying to respond to like these both competitive market forces.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for all this insight. My last question for you is, where can we find you if LPs, startups, founders want to get to know all your work? Where should they go?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me as Adrian Mendoza. Pretty active on LinkedIn, and that's we do a lot of posting on stories and education and travels, but also we try to connect to the larger ecosystem nationally to have founders reach out to us. If CVCs want to reach out, they're happy to reach out to us on LinkedIn, as well as potential investors or also potential corporates that want to learn more about our venture corporating program, like the one you're working on with Mendoza Impact, where they can leverage philanthropy dollars to get some of those big ideas made.
Thank you so much, Adrian. When I'm on your side of the pond, I will probably come and see you. But thank you so much for joining me on Scouting for Growth today.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Scouting for Growth. Please subscribe, share with friends, and leave a 5-star rating. Your rating is so valuable. I review all of them, and my team help me adapt content to meet your needs. Also, connect with me on my preferred channels. I am a B2B growth expert, so you will find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads, and X as well as Blue Sky. All information available below. Until next, keep scouting for growth.